This is probably the most excited I've been for an episode in a long time because we have Esteban here, Tanner at Horween Leather Company. And we're hoping to get Esteban to explain us a little leather tanning 101. How do you feel about that, Esteban? You ready to do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Very simply put, maybe you could give us like a big picture of what leather tanning is, and then maybe we can break down each component sort of linearly through the process and tell us from a chemistry perspective of some of the things that are happening, because I think I and many people have no idea the mystery of chemistry, and you're the perfect guy to explain it to us.
Right. So you want to start with like a generalization, and then we kind of narrow down as we go. I know
like what's the general goal of tanning, and then maybe break down each of the steps.
Yeah, or maybe tell us what all the steps are. Like give us a quick, because we've talked about a lot of the steps probably in less specific terms. So maybe you can tell us, like, give us a summary, like a 30-second summary of what you're going to talk about.
Okay.
Like timeline, and then we can break it from there.
Yeah, I mean, like I try to break it down in terms of making leather in like 3 phases, right? Phase 1 being you grab something that's raw, it's not working, it's going to putrefy, and you're going to try to preserve it as fast as possible. So the first phase is your beam house activities, where you try to get everything, remove all non-essentials and tan it essentially. Then you have phase 2, which is transformation of a basic tannage to something you're trying to handle, something that you're trying to round out, really more like accentuated out, right? And then you have phase 3, which is finishing, which is upgrading, which is giving that facelift to something you already started. So that's how I would pretty much summarize the phases of the leather making. Like I said, phase 1, I'm sure you guys talked about soaking, deliming, unhairing.
Yeah, but this is perfect, man. Let's break down each of those. And again, so like like what's the goal of each, and then like chemically what's happening, that's things that we can't physically see with our eyeballs without an additional lens,
right?
Break down some of that chemistry.
I mean, ideally, let's just start with phase 1, right? Like I just said, like you go from raw to tan. So essentially going back, you start with soaking, you lime, you unhairing, you're deliming, you're baiting, and you're pickling, and then you get to your tannage. But ideally, what's the objective here we're trying to do? We're trying to remove everything that's not essential from the skin itself. And the target goal we first have to understand is collagen. Collagen is the skin protein. And then we have to further break down what collagen is. And collagen is just, think of it as I like to think as like a rope. And you start to remove the fibers, you get into microfibers to a string, essentially, right? A thread. That's what collagen is. It's made out of these proteins. So this protein structure just gets unraveled, and we really start to get into the level as we go. But just to not throw everyone on a tangent, essentially is we try to get to that point, remove the non-essential proteins. So we're going to go basically the beam house, right? Soaking, you're trying to remove all the dirt, all the blood, all of those non-essential fats that are kind of floating around.
Like you just want the rope? Is that what
you're essentially trying to get the rope structure, which is massive. I mean, I don't know if you guys want to see the
bring it out, and I'll overlay a picture of it too, so people know what's up.
To try to really understand the basic thing is, we start with these like little tiny molecules or amino acids. They're really small, and essentially they start to be built on into chains. So I don't know if you can see it properly here, but essentially the amino acids are just big chain molecules, and then I illustrate in them really simplistically where they're just long chains, and then it kind of zooms out where they start to entangle themselves in these helices, and then further it becomes a film, a fiber, and then on top of that you get this big giant rope, like I'm saying. So the collagen of the leather is essentially this big rope. So it's massive. It's like if we're comparing apples to apples, it's like look at a building versus us, right? And so we have to really get to that point where we get that essential part, and then we can transform what we need to. So like I said, soaking, you want to wash it, you want to remove all those non-essentials from the beginning, what you can. And then you start to your liming, right? Which is basic, using calcium hydroxide. You're trying to swell up this skin. It's not leather. So you're raising the pH up, you're swelling it up in order to open the structure up. So then at those times, then now you can start to allow to remove the hairs by introducing what is it, that sodium hydrosulfide. So at this point, it's like Nair, like I don't know if anyone's used it. Essentially, those cysteine proteins will essentially break apart those sulfur parts of that amino acid, and it comes off. And so now you're removing the hair completely off the skin, but you're doing it in such a way that you're controlling the pH, because if it's too strong, it's going to break apart, and then you're going to have gelatin. Those are the extremes in controlling pH. So we're controlling that amount in order to remove the hair. And once the hair has been removed, now you can go ahead and start to flesh it out. You take out, around this time, you take it out and you're fleshing it out, because now you're exposing a lot of that non-essential still proteins that are happening on the exterior. So you're cleaning it up. You're essentially, that's why it's called beam house, right? Because you used to just use the beam, you would use a beam and pretty much flesh out all those non-essential proteins off. So after that, you would go ahead and put it back inside your mill or your drum. And then you're going ahead and you're going to remove that lime that you introduced. So that's what's called deliming. So at those stages, the pH is pretty high. It's around 12 to 13. And at that point, you want to start interacting using ammonium sulfate or ammonium chloride to start to introduce those calciums with it and remove it. So you're reducing the swelling again. You're cleaning it up. But at these times, you're also creating a perfect environment around 8 to 9 pH. And at that point, you can start to add your protease enzyme. So let's call it the bait. And that, in which case, now you're going ahead, what are you doing? You're allowing these enzymes to further break down non-structural proteins, right? Like stuff like elastin. Like elastin is something that keeps our structure and our skin intact. You want all that removed because you're trying to get to this core section of collagen. And then once you let that run, let it run its course, then you can go ahead, wash it out, and then prepare it to its stage of preparation of pickling. I mean, sure, people have seen how, people eat cucumbers and pickles, right? Essentially, it's just a jar of water, you have some acid, and you have some salt. That's essentially what you're doing with the sides. So you're dropping the pH down in such a dramatic way where you're preserving it, you're preparing the sides, molecularly, they're all starting to becoming more positively charges on the sections. And I'll bring back the board again so I can kind of emphasize on the sections. Because you're manipulating it, right? You're playing with different charges. So pickling, you're going all the way down, pH is dropping, but at the same time, you can't extremely go severely down, because then you'll have acid swelling. And then, but going back to what I was saying, you'll denature this protein that we really are caring to maintain intact. And then you have gelatin. So you don't want gelatin. We wanted to keep it structurally integrity intact. So once the pickle has been stated, now you can go ahead and put mineral tanning. You can put vegetable tanning or syn tanning, any different type of tannage you can start introduce. And so what's going to happen is that it's going to accept it right away, because it's like the charges, we're going to be seeing a lot of it as we progress into this wet end, that we don't want stuff to be opposing charges, because what's going to happen, they're going to cling on together. And we don't want that. We want it to be kind of repulsive in a way. So it travels down inside your sides, right? You have your grain, your corium in the middle, and you have your flesh. You want it to travel all the way down. Full penetration. Once you have that intact, so ideally, let's say, for example, we're doing chrome tanning. Chrome tanning, you're allowing the chromium sulfate to go in, to dive in, but not react tremendously to these sides. So at that point, now you've fully allowed it to penetrate all the way, and now you reverse what you just did with your pickling. You're increasing the pH. So that's allowing, and for chrome tanning, it's olation. So it's a lot of like a cross-linking, if you will, where a lot of these things are freezing in time in that void, and everything is stopping in suspension. And essentially, that's where you're tanning it, because now these parts that normally would be eaten by bacteria or fungi, now it's kind of hard for them to break down. I remember we were discussing this a couple of years ago in terms of the mineral tanning, where it's like you're putting metals in there, and so it's, how can you really break that apart, like biologically? So once you reach that point, that's phase one, right? So we're removing the non-essentials, we're putting everything, preparing it, tanning it, and then now it's ready for something, whatever you want to do, right? You've told me years ago that it was like an open canvas, and then you can change things. Well, that's phase two. So phase two is
Well,
Your
let me pause before we get to phase 2. Do you mind if I pause you here for a second?
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, pause.
Yeah,
Pause.
I mean, that was a lot, and that was amazing. Thank you for that. That's perfect. I had a thought though too, because I'm familiar with the Horween specific formulas for each of those stages.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, before you get to the mineral syntan or veg tan, the last step of phase 1, I'm wondering how similar every tannery is for those earlier phases. Is the chemistry always the same chemistry? Therefore, everybody's going to dehair the same way, for example?
There is more or less, it's a standard method, right? Everyone runs the same sort of procedure, except that there is different technologies that could be introduced to be more efficient. An example is like for the deliming phase in the ammonium sulfate, you can have a lot more effluent being discharged. And usually that's been like a recent sort of stuff that they've been trying to get away and be more eco-friendly. So they use different types of salts to replace that. And then there's other actions where you're using CO2 instead of ammonium sulfate. But then guess what? You got to use a pressured system, and there's different things. So essentially now it's more of an eco phase where you start to try to tweak certain things for the environment, right? But pretty much the methodologies are essentially the same. I mean, you're still using.
If you were going to make a competing tannery to any other tannery, of which of those stages would you emphasize to make your product a little bit different? Would it only be that very last stage of phase 1, you think?
No, it goes in abundance of different sections, right? Because I mean,
and let me rephrase it. If you're going for a particular, the environmental stuff is certainly relevant and important. If you were to sort of take that category of concern and leave it aside, and you were specifically going for, like, I want to make amazing leather, like, damn the torpedoes, I just want something amazing and a little bit different. I'm trying to figure out where in that stage is like the special sauce, you know?
Right. I mean, it's interesting because it's a compilation the way I see it, right? It's like if you're not doing a proper wash, or you're over, like I said, over with lime, and you're not taking care of that swelling of the alkaline, you can denature your stuff and you're going to have poor results later on. All these are like stepping stones to making something great. So you could ruin something pretty fast in any of these sections. I mean, I'm looking at it here visually, the listing, and I'm like, yeah, like if you're over liming, it'll swell. If it's delimed, you're going to have a lot of still structural proteins that are going to be still intact. If the bait doesn't work properly, then you're going to. So when it comes to tan, even if you pickled all that, it's not going to go through. And so it's like, it's kind of like, it's hard to say if you have to get this one right. I honestly think it sounds weird, but it's like all of them have to be right in the sense that it has to be in the same section.
Yeah, the step that each subsequent step is requires the one before it to be done like properly.
Correct.
Because you like things will start to fall apart. I mean, like I just wanted to describe. You said the beam house, like that. It's called a beam house because there used to be just like these rows of wooden beams, and they would put the hides on the beam, and they would have these knives that had 2 handles on them, and then they would just scrape the backs of the hides. So that's why it's called the beam house. And now there's a machine that does that. But I just wanted to describe. You can, if you look up like home fleshing, like you'll see people like doing it with like deer skins in their backyards and stuff. If people want to see what that looks like, but yeah. So I think this part of the process is interesting because it's so formulaic compared to other parts of it. You know, you talk about like color and retan and finishing. Like you have a chance. Like if you are do something, you're like, oh, that's not quite right. I need to make an adjustment. Like you can make an adjustment, and in many cases, or in some cases, or oftentimes, you're okay. Like you can make an adjustment on the fly. But like if you like find out that your pickle is wrong and you have gone into tanning, like you are going to end up with something that's not going to be tanned properly. And this is, I mean, the way I can stress that to people that don't like think about this every day is like a breakdown. Like if you, all this equipment has electric motors on it. And if like one of these motors stops working all of a sudden, like that's a real problem because stuff gets tied up and you can't drain stuff and you can't control the pH and what we call the flow, like the water, and where that is and how it goes in and out. So it's a very sensitive process. But I think that, to your point, Phil, every tannery does some form of this, like the bait pickle tan. Like everything that comes before retanning is, you'll see every tannery in the world will have done or taken part in that in some form or fashion. It'll change depending on, like what Esteban said, if it's veg or syntan or mineral or even hide type can have some effect on it. But yeah, it's like super important that everything goes exactly right and the pHs are where they need to be and temperatures and everything.
Let me give you the reason I asked, and maybe this will help clarify the question. Is I have heard that Horween's chrome tanning formulation is somehow special and different. And my world experience in leather is pretty limited in a tannery to only Horween. So I don't have any other tannery experience with chrome tanning. I've just been told that this Horween chrome tan is special somehow. And I'm trying to, I don't want you to necessarily spill the beans of what the secret is, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, of the things that you can control there, what would make something more special, quote unquote?
I feel like going back to the whole what makes the leather is, this is the make or break, like how Nick was saying, because if you think about it, this stuff is raw right now. It's live. Like, it's only going to get worse as it starts, right? The reason, going back, and I missed this one on the soaking aspect, is that you're getting these hides with salt on them, so they stasis. It's like a stasis of these skins. So right now you're raced against time to try to get these things going. So, like I said, it's sensitive and it has to be done fast and efficient in that way to preserve it until you get to the pickled stage. I feel that there's you buy yourself some time, but the stuff is still, until it'll putrefy. So I think, again, going back to the aspect of just the beam house, it's important that every section gets done properly, because you're going to see it all later on. I mean, in terms of veins and stuff like that, or things popping up in terms of blotches, and even, like, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Sandblast, if I'm not mistaken. In terms of, if you're not properly removing the calcium from the lime, you're going to see little spots forming. And so it's calcium carbonate. And so then it freezes on the grains, and you move forward and you're doing everything, but you're going to see it right away. Or we've seen it in the past, right? That there's some hairs that are still left over or something like that. Well, it's like those follicles didn't fully come out. So it's all these things are compounding. So it's not just a one thing, or it's such a, I guess, lame saying like all of it is important, because it truly is. It's like it's stepping stones for everything, right?
Well, and I'm actually recalling what the specific example people were saying that is different about Horween's chrome leather is it tends to plump up a little bit more than other tanneries' chrome tan leathers. What would make a leather do such a thing to plump up like that?
Probably just like I would say the pH levels going a little more closer to those extremes, where you're not breaking it, but you're making everything more positively charged, and so everything's kind of clumped together and kind of ideally more tight, right? But you have to be really careful in terms of those pHs, because you one step further and you'll have jelly. You have jello. So
I got more questions about phase one, unless Nick if you wanted to jump in on that.
No, I think that the easiest thing that differentiates the our chrome formulations, it's lower chrome. I mean, it's just like, that's the easiest. I mean, there's a number of other things that are different, but that's the easiest one to point to.
Gotcha. And you were mentioning in the end of phase one, Esteban, that you have different materials to add that you're going to fix into that rope of collagen. You said minerals, we got syntan and veg with tree barks. Why would you choose one or the other of each of those things? And is there more than those three?
I mean, it's like a branch, right? Mineral tanning can go from just chrome to aluminum to zirconium to titanium. Then you have your veg tans, which you have your cabracha, you have your mimosa, you have your tara. All these different extracts of different plants will offer different shades, offer different firmnesses, roundnesses. And so it just really depends what it is the biggest question is what are you trying to make? The pickle stage is right where you have the choice what you want to do. So the biggest I think leap of modern technology that happened before veg was the chrome, because chrome you can do it in a couple hours. You already have tanned leather, versus veg took weeks, because you're not making that big cross-linking section when I explained earlier, where it dives in, you manipulate the pH, and then everything kind of freezes. The veg is a slow mechanical action. It's slowly going in. These molecules are much tinier, and they're kind of just going in, they're locking into place with the collagen, and it takes time for that displacement to happen. And
You're saying the veg stuff is tinier than the mineral
well,
stuff?
yeah, if you look at when I say in terms of the fixation part, so you look at the aromatic ring with the hydroxyl part of your polyphenols. There, some of them, disclaimer, there is some that are pretty big, some that are pretty small, but ideally when they're going in at such a slower rate before they fix, and chrome goes in, but it fixes right away as soon as the pH goes up. And you can't fix them like that with standard veg. Veg has to naturally, it's a mechanical action, and you're adjusting the amount of offering that you're going in there.
And why chrome as opposed to aluminum or anything else?
Chrome offers a lot of tensile tensile strength, but also hydrothermal stability. Meaning, so if you grab a piece of raw skin or pickled, and you put it into a heat test, it's going to cook and it's going to shrivel. So when you put chrome in, the chroming will create more stability, and it will fight the shrinkage. So it's really durable in the sense of that heat. Versus like veg will actually, it's really, you have to be careful with it, because if it goes too hot, again, it's still plant matter, and it's not as structurally strong like that in terms of shrinkage. So the temperatures will just, you'll fry it. So again, depends on, going to the parent question, is what is it that you want to make? If you want something that's stronger, do you want something that's faster that you can deliver? Do you want something that has brighter colors? And as we talk about the retan, we'll start to go in a little more depth in terms of the characteristics you're building. Right now, this is like kind of like your Lego set right now. You're building what you want to make. You want to make a house, you want to make a castle, depends on what it is. We need to first know what you want, and then we can start to decide what goes with what.
I think you told me some stuff that like really helped me change how I thought about this topic. And when we were talking about chrome, you made a really fun analogy to an X-Men. So
yeah, the Wolverine style. Yeah, that was well, yeah. I mean, essentially, that's
you're like combining organic collagen with metal.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've seen that movie with one. Well, there's many, but there's one where he breaks all the bones and then they put all the adamantium in him. Essentially, that's how I envision leather, like that. It's like you're filling these voids with metals that are stronger, and you can't break them apart. Like, you try eating leather, see what's gonna happen. Like, you can't digest it the same way why bacteria and fungus can't digest it, right? So, but yeah, what questions did you?
Well, I was trying to. I think I know like part of the answer here, so I was trying to lead the witness a little bit when I was asking about chrome versus alum tanning stuff. And if I recall correctly, I think you said chrome is unique because it has more binding sites than other things. It has like the most possible. Am I remembering this correctly?
It's more, yes. I have like a figure here that you can see the binding sites and how it kind of like, since it doesn't follow the octet rule, which is octet rule, like normally it has to have 4 pairs of electrons. So four bonds of something, like carbon. But chrome can do multiple reactions, like it can have multiple bonds. So it allows for more reaction sites to happen. I guess that's what you meant, like what I meant, in terms of it can get some more different sections of the collagen protein on there. And
was it the ligands or however that's pronounced? Is that so that you were saying there's like little arms that stick off the molecule, and chrome has more than other things, and it has the most possible to bind to of all materials. Is that right? I remember you explaining it was like there's no other possible way to do it more than these amount of bonds.
I think it's going back to the same thing about the octet rule. I mean, let me see if I can. But yeah, no. So more or less, what I'm trying to say is that chrome normally can bind because it doesn't obey that octet rule, which is normally you have to have at least 4 sites of covalent bonds, like a standard atoms or compounds normally work with. But with chrome being one of those transition metals, it can do that. So it's connecting to different, that same chrome can connect to multiple ligands, like I was saying. And then on top of that, it's that part where the pH goes up, where olation happens, where all the chrome gets pretty much just like a big spider web, where all the chromes also start to react with themselves. And it's just a big web of this one. And so it's an interesting chemical, because it's like, yeah, it's like when they discovered the CD, right? It's like, wow, it was something so much different and efficient.
Yeah, it's like, this is perfect, right?
Yeah. So I mean, again, everything in terms of what
I'm not saying that CDs are perfect, by the way.
CDs are great. I love CDs.
Okay.
But no, so again, yeah, I mean, chrome has been one of those stapled ones for a while. We're seeing new stuff, right? A couple years ago, I'm sure you guys talked about the olive tan, which is another variation of veg tan, right? Just repurposing stuff. But again, we still have to see what other tannages are offering, right? Because I know there's some that's called zeolite, and that's using a silicon based as well, kind of like derivation of sand, right? And they're using that technology to try to offer also like alternatives to like glutaldehyde and stuff like that. So each one has its own properties, advantages and disadvantages. It just depends on what you're looking for in an article, right?
I have to admit, I'm slightly confused just because I can't envision. Like, I get it between chrome and veg, and that those, just saying veg is like too general. It sounds like, because you could use a multitude of tree barks or a singular tree bark from multitude of sources, right?
Right.
It's like that's not even like an appropriate comparison, chrome versus veg. I guess what the question is, and then we've had audience members ask this before, is, why would you choose quebracho over oak, or why would you want to combine them into like a tea of a bunch of tree barks? What are these tree barks properties? Like, what are they doing towards the end product?
Well, I mean, each one will offer different firmness because of the amount of astringency that they have in terms of the actual extract. Going back to how I was saying with veg, where the polyphenols, like I said, there's some that are, when I say polyphenols, it's again, it's the same thing. It's like you say veg, it could mean a lot of things. There could be polyphenols that are small, some that are massive. They're all different portions. So each one, like oak and chestnut and quebracho, they all have different compositions of these polyphenols that will offer different characteristics. Like if you want roundness, you want firmness, and you want something that's a little on the darker end, you would probably go quebracho. If you want something that's Tara, a lighter color, something that's softer, but you still want that veg characteristic of the patina. That's why you see a lot of that in the automotive industry. I mean, that's something you don't really see a lot of quebracho in automotive leather, just because of that darkness, the firmness. You don't want that for that article.
That's helpful.
So it depends a lot on the articles that you're aiming for. But again, yeah, it's kind of wild to see that all these it just generalizes. It's just a tree, right? And you're looking at branches as you're going to what it is that you're choosing.
Yeah, I think that if you think about it, like at extreme ends, you look at like a sole leather, like an outsole leather, which they've tanned with barks like oak to get that extreme fill and density and roundness that you're talking about. But they've sacrificed, flexibility, and there's very little empty space in there, so there's not a lot of, again, there's like it's very firm, which is not what you would want if you were doing upholstery. So like that's right. Like you'd want, on the other end of that spectrum, you'd want something that's going to preserve it and give you some strength, but it's not going to be so dense that you're creating like cardboard that just has enough flexibility to do what you want it to do and be super durable. Yeah. So there's every combination thereof in between of all of the different. It's interesting. You sent me that handbook, and I've got some older literature, and they talk about there's barks and there's extracts, and then there's woods. Those are like the three places the tannins come from primarily, and they've literally tried like everything, and a lot of them are like not significant. Basically, don't use it, but it tells you like what it does.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting to see. Just the technology is not. I mean, it's pretty old at this point, but it's not extreme. And just to see that they've literally tried everything, and I think that I have to go back and read this again. But I think that aluminum actually predated chrome as like the first mineral that was used as a mineral tannage, but it was because it was naturally occurring in certain parts of the world that they were using the salt that just had the aluminum in there, and it was making leather that was better. So it's interesting.
Would you say, I feel like I hear the quebracho a lot as a component for a liquor. Would you say, I think you were hinting at this maybe, that quebracho is mostly used for a darker color, or does it have some additional property that makes it often used?
Well, it's by nature it is darker and it's reddish, because if you look at the quebracho tree itself and you see the heart of it, it's red and dark. So it's like those tannins will essentially go into the sides that you're going. But again, those when you talk about quebracho, it's pretty dense, and that it's interesting because it's not something you can use. It's sludgy, so it doesn't work for a full veg. So you have to really manipulate the viscosity. There's more to that for it to go in, because you can say, look at this quebracho, this tree's great, it's strong, but when you make it and it's sludge, good luck trying to put that inside your leather. So you have to manipulate this characteristic where you're offering the tannin, but not it's one of the things called case hardening, where it's like you're putting too much extract into it that it only stays on the top and doesn't go in, and now you have a problem where nothing's going to go in anymore. So quebracho has a part to play, but again, it's the blend of different extracts that you're putting in. So you can't just look at one and say this is all we're going to use. It has to be a blend of different ones, at least for the veg extract tanning, right? It's much more complicated in terms of like mineral, like how Nick was saying about aluminum, that you could use aluminum to fill those voids as well. And then we'll get into this in phase 2, but there's even here in this phase 1, you can do combination tannages. So you can do some aluminum and some chrome within, still in the pickled section, but then there's also like chrome aluminum with some aldehyde, and so glutaldehyde. You can put those together, and it's interesting because what happens is that the aluminum is smaller, it goes in, and then when it's fixing, and then you go ahead and incorporate that aldehyde, it also synergistically works together because it's connecting to the actual aluminum along with collagen. So they're offering both a synergistic sort of strength, all going back to the shrinkage temperature. So now you start to play with also combining a combo of, now all of them go together. It's all depending on what it is that we're trying to make. And
yeah, it's interesting. You do a blend of tree barks, but the blend of minerals is interesting. I wonder how much people have explored that, and maybe I feel like I don't see that. I
haven't seen. I mean, the other thing too is like with minerals, you also have syntans that you can put in. The syntans are just synthetic components as well that you're trying to emulate what a mineral tanning does and veg does. Those are kind of like the more modern ones, I feel, that haven't really been spoken, because they're still kind of, it's still in the development and they're still trying them out. But the kings right now are obviously there's the mineral tannage and the veg right now.
Yeah, cool.
You do see syntans, but again, I'll talk about more about that in phase 2.
Well, how about we hop to phase 2 then? I think this is one that's a total mystery to a lot of, actually all of it is, to be honest. But I think people don't realize that there's tanning and retanning. I think people go, oh, it's leather tanning, you tan it once.
Yeah, so the combo, I guess, tannage is kind of like the segue right to phase 2. So you made your leather. We successfully, if we did everything right, guess what? Our stuff isn't going to rot, and we have at least a viable product. We can make stuff with it. It's not going to look nice. It's going to be probably dry out and be a little rigid.
Very rigid, like a board.
Yeah, so like a cardboard. I mean, it's not gonna look good, but it's not gonna it's not gonna rot. So so then phase 2 is essentially the transformation of this open canvas, right? And so you're gonna mold what it is that you want. So now you're introducing it's called retan, because you're retanning. You could do that, or you can do a combinations of both. It's the sky's the limit. Again, the pairing question is, what do you want as a final product? This is the time that you can do a manipulation of sorts of things, right? Because you're retanning, you're introducing, let's say we want a patina with chrome, then you're going to introduce some veg type of tannin extract. That's the same ones we were talking about at phase 1, but just a little bit of an offering. Just again, this fiber of collagen is massive. It's like you accepted the first round of tanning agents, and now we're going to introduce more different chemicals to give it a characteristic. So the retanning essentially is your veg. You can do a rechroming. So some tanneries do, like if you have different sources of blue, they're different shades, you different high sources are all going to be a little different. So you do rechroming. So essentially you're giving more sites of reaction sites that we were talking about. You can do more syntans, but ideally there's a sky's the limit here where you can do coloring. Essentially is here's where you're going to do a particular color that you want, and fat liquoring, which is the lubrication, which is vital for leather to be post when you're done. But let's go back. So that's just the synopsis of what's going to happen in phase 2, right? So phase 2, we just got our fresh blue, right? We'll talk about blue, wet blue or chrome. We just got it. They shaved them down, they split them down, and then they shaved them. So they shaved the part where the flesh part of the side is. So it opens up those fibers. So it's going to help it penetrate. Kind of like what you did back in phase 1 when they were fleshing during the lime. So you're doing this again. So you put those in the mill or in the drum. You're going to rehydrate them. So you're going to do, it's called a wetting back. Essentially, you're trying to level out the pH in the whole sides with your water. And again, collagen thrives in water because there's a bunch of hydrogen bonds in this big fiber. So it needs to equalize. So you're going to start by washing it, equalizing pH. Then at that point, you can go ahead and making sure that as it's being rotating, you're achieving a proper flexibility of the side as well, because it's hydrated, it's not dry. And then after that, you can go ahead and take out the water. Your wash was done. You're removing any excess flesh. Now you're going to go ahead and what's going to happen? What we did was in our final from chrome tanning, your pH was around 3.5 to 4. So it's still pretty acidic. I mean, but it was just enough to break down the fixating the chrome in there. But now what's going to happen is we need to manipulate the sides because we have to change and going back. I want to take my little board back. So I'll be back. Yeah, the board shows me that you probably take a picture and I'll show it to you as we go. But these little molecules on the top, the collagen molecules, you can see this is the amino, which is a positively charged, and the other side is an OH, which is a carboxyl section right here. So it's negatively charged. So depending on the pHs, it'll change. So ideally, collagen, there's a term called isoelectric point, meaning that both sections, I'm trying to orientate myself here. Both sections, the positive and the negatively charged, are both active, so they cancel each other out, so it's a net zero charge. But if I want to open up and accept the chemicals in neutralization, this is what it's called, is I'm going to increase the pH in such a way that now I can go ahead and have a negatively charged hold on, I'm having some trouble here trying to figure out this. This way? Yeah, there it is. So if I raise the pH, now you can see that oxygen on that one section, this is just a microscopical look of like what's happening. So it's becoming negatively charged. So at this point, I'm allowing the sides to create negatively charged throughout the collagen, but not tremendously to break it apart, just enough just to give those charges, because I'm gonna want to put dyes, liquors, extracts, whatever, and they're all anionic or negatively charged. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to allow them, kind of like what happened in the pickling section, where I'm trying to let it all penetrate inside and equalize. Because if I try to do it right now while it's still acidic and they're negatively charged, what's going to happen? They're going to react right away on top of the surface, and you're going to have stuff that's reacting on top, and nothing's going to go in, and it's not efficient. So
can I interrupt you there? I might have missed this. Where did the charged particles come from?
So in collagen, there's always a shared part, right? So that's the reason that in the little board, it's essentially the chain that you see. There's a negative, there's an amino group that's positive charged and a carboxyl group that's negatively charged. We create a chain of it. It's called a peptide bond. So this amino acid that makes the protein, they're all chained like that. There's a positive charge and a negatively charged. So those charges are always, in a way, connected and bridged, but you manipulate the charge based on that isoelectric point. And so what you're doing is you're changing the charges to manipulate what it is that you're trying to do. So in this case, for the neutralization, it technically is just raising the pH. You're making the environment negatively charged. So you're predominating the carboxyl group. I wish I have better chart here, but either way,
I'm following you. Yeah.
but either way, so you're allowing a negative charge environment in such a way that you're allowing the stuff to go in, and it's going to be almost like a repulsion, almost, right? Because the stuff that you're offering, you can offer your dye, you can offer your extract, your fat liquors, all those are negatively charged. So they're not going to want to be around them at all.
Sure.
So their kind of mechanical action is driving them in just to kind of, they're wiggling their way, they don't like it, and they're just going in. So you're allowing all of that to go in. This is assuming you already did the neutralization, like I said. So you can go ahead and you put in your dye, you can put in your extract at different times. And like I said, depends on what you're trying to do. But they all work almost the same way. So let's, for example, you're doing extract. We're gonna not confuse and go with colors and all that. We're gonna leave those for now. We're just gonna do it. I want to just retan. So you're gonna go ahead and neutralize. You make it negatively charged. You let your extracts go in. Once they go in, you go ahead and drop formic acid or a light, not a super strong acid, because again, we're going to have those problems where astringency, and that will also cause different problems in your grain. You don't want none of that. So we use formic acid ideally. And so that's going to happen? It's going to shift what we just did with neutralization. We're going to go back down the pH. You're going to drop pH down. And so then that freezes everything, because now the collagen is being positively charged. The other side gets activated. So now you have the amino group, the end part, that starts to bind with, let's say in this case, we were doing the extract. So that binds with that, and everything gets locked into place. So again, normally when you're retanning, you could change, you can do extract, you can put color in mix if you want. It just depends what you're trying to do, right? Yeah. So again, you did a full extract. Extract's in there, and I want to just do a slight dye. I want to change it red because I love color red. So I'm going to go ahead and put red on top of there. So even though it's acidic, you already know that it's called top dyeing, because now I just put the dye on top. It's going to fixate on the top parts, but it's not going to dive in all the way. And that's what I want for this particular article. I just want to do that. And then after that, after you did your retan and your coloring, right, I can go ahead and put some fat liquor in there, what is fat liquor? I'm sorry if I didn't explain it. But essentially it's just oils that have been modified, and there's a term called sulfonated. So essentially you're introducing sulfur or sulfate compounds into this raw oil, until it's kind of like a group that plays well with water and also with its own species, which is other oils. So you're using this in order for it to go into the leather as well, negatively charged, I'm saying, and it's lubricating the sides, because you're allowing this oil to go inside those fibers that we're talking about, those big ropes. So when that happens, now you're achieving you're avoiding it to stick, because right now everything's fine. You were talking about the leather's in the drum and mill with water and stuff. It's having a great time. It's in the pool. But what happens when you come outside of the pool? You're going to dry up. And if these fibers are not lubricated, guess what's going to happen? They're all going to get squished. And when they get squished, then now you're going to have problems, because everything's going to crack. Stuff is just going to want to stay in one position. And that's why you see a lot of I think that's one of the biggest difference in terms of different tanneries and leather industries, is the durability that leather lasts, is because they put enough lubrication on their fibers, because they dry out and guess what? Everything cracks. But to reiterate, phase two is, I think my mind is kind of going everywhere.
That's a big one. It's tough. It's a tough.
Yeah. But
is tough to describe.
but let me rephrase in a kind of like a faster, more efficient way. So we start off wetting back. We start by increasing the pH. So you use sodium bicarbonate or sodium formate or other ones, but you want something, a basic alkaline that's not strong, because again, we don't want extremes. We want something methodical, something that will raise your pH slowly and efficiently. Once your pH is at an acceptable level, which in between 5 or 6 is the pH, then now your sides are ready to accept whatever it is you're putting in. Extract, dyes, or fat liquors, are all together or separate. It just depends on what we're trying to make. Once that's done, you throw in some formic acid, you're dropping the pH down, and now you're locking everything in place. I like to think of it as open door, closed door. You're opening the doors when you're raising the pH, and you're closing them up And you do this constantly throughout a run, depending on what you're doing. So it's a beautiful thing because it's like you're manipulating your protein as it's going. It just depends on, and that's why it's vital that you check all your pHs at these times because it's telling you what's happening and you can see it in the sides. But yeah, that would be phase 2. So what's happening there? You're increasing the roundness. You're increasing when I say roundness is when you grab a side and you bend it, does it flex nicely? Does it curve? That's what you're looking for in terms of, and you're getting that with those retanning extracts. You're allowing, let's say if you're using a veg retan, you're giving that blue, the wet blue that normally doesn't have that patina, you're giving it patina because now you're introducing veg. Veg is known for the patina, the change of color. But again, you're going to go a darker color. You're not going to get any more brighter colors that you normally would if you would get wet blue. Because that's already a pretty vibrant color. So it just depends. Again, I keep going back to that same parent question. What do you want?
Yeah.
It depends on what article you want. But yeah, so phase 2 gives you that. The other things that I was going to mention is with the fat liquors, the oils, the lubrication will give you a lot of buffing properties. So let's say, are we talking about a full grain leather? Or are we talking about corrected grain? Because if it's full grain, you're not going to buff it. So the grain should be intact and it's fine. But let's say you want to correct it and you're going to buff it. You want to make sure those lubrications on that top grain are nice and lubricated, because by the time it goes through, you'll see it. It'll be raspy. The stuff won't come out. It won't be as nappy as what we were anticipating. So a lot of that happens. There's other parts of like, and I forgot to mention this as well, which is it's kind of nice because I'm thinking and I'm kind of like introducing as we're going here, that this is another time too where, let's say the sides, you're using some cows, and cows are notorious for having some, loose bellies, and because, weight gain. I mean, I'm one myself here, but anyways, you right here, you're adding fillers. You can add protein fillers in the same phase 2, and it works just the same. Anionic or cationic, just depends on what you're doing. But if it's negatively charged, it's going to go more inside the bellies because that's where it's all loose. So you're filling.
That reduces the looseness, the protein fillers.
You're introducing fillers.
Why not put that in every single side?
Because then you'll have issues with more or less of like blotchiness if it's not going in, and it's only selective. It only works on certain areas, because if you try to do it, you're going to see the darker spots, because you want to be more methodical with it. Only a small amount is offered, because if it's too much, all of the sides, you're going to see splotches as they go. But this is one of those things where you can add. The other things that help too is that I guess you might have to bring this up and saying that, oh, well, you said, Esteban, you said that veg takes forever. Why are you using retan? Is that even going to work? Well, there's also other components called auxiliary components. So these auxiliary components assist. So they sit on the side and they help control the rate of what you're putting in. And sometimes it even accelerates the rate. So there's it's called another syntan that you're using. So it allows more uptake, more veg to go in faster because it's assisting. And the same thing with dyes. Like you would normally see splotches, but with this, it's a dispersing agent. So it allows you to slowly distribute dyes by slowing down the rate that it's fixing. So there's a lot of things that go into this phase 2, which is
awesome.
It's more than an hour talk for sure.
Oh my God.
But it's interesting just to try to do a synopsis of what's happening at the time.
Can I give you my layperson idiot understanding of phase 1 and phase 2, and then you please correct me? So I always think of it as like phase 1, you're going to remove all the stuff that's going to rot and you're going to purify it, and you're going to introduce some tanning agent, chrome, tree barks, and you're fusing the fibers of the skin to make it a little bit more like a tree or a little bit more like metal. But in that process, you pulled out all the fats that are going to allow the leather to be flexible. So in phase 2, one of the biggest things are the fat liquors and the oils. Maybe you even do some hot stuffing where you lubricate the fibers again, and maybe you can introduce some colors. But retanning certainly is an infinite range of things you could do, but the main function, as I see it, is to reintroduce oils that are going to smell good and look good and feel good that you had taken out in phase 1. Have generally the right direction there?
Yeah, that's I would say that's a good summary. I mean, yeah,
I don't need chemistry, man.
I think that
there you go. You're already doing chemistry, man. There it is.
No, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think that one of the things that gets overlooked or maybe isn't intuitive is that when you add just the importance of the addition of oils or fats or greases or waxes or whatever is lubricating the fibers, because it's not only it's giving you the pliability and whatever water repellent characteristics that might come along with the wax or whatever, but it's also there's a lot of strength in the finished product that comes from or can come from the oils too. To go back to like the fibers need to be lubricated so they can move freely and not get compacted and start to fall apart. So I think that's I don't think that's something that we've talked about before, Phil, is like how important oil content can be for like the actual strength of the product. And just to help people visualize, I think that between phase 1 and phase 2, like what we're talking about in these two phases, it's all like contained in a drum, more or less. Like the door can come on and off, at least in our place, and you can check and make additions and all that stuff. But between phase 1 and phase 2, it's two different vessels. So phase 1 is a bigger vessel because everything is sort of or is being chrome tanned in the case of chrome tanning, and then it comes out and then it's being there's some mechanical processes that go along with it. So it's being pressed so it lays flat enough so that you can see what you're working with, so that it can then be assigned to specific product categories. And at that point, it's then more or less it's ready to be assigned to a specific order, which means it needs to be processed in terms of thickness and selection and all that stuff. So there's a bunch of steps that even happen in between these two phases that are crucial.
There's a whole department,
that are crucial in terms of prepping it, even for phase 2, to make sure that the product is usable for the customer at the end, for thickness and cosmetic and size and for a bunch of different reasons. So it's people come into the factory for a tour and they're always like, how come you guys don't make any like finished, you don't do any cutting and sewing here? And I'm just going to tell them to listen to this podcast now because it's so complicated.
It's like amazing any of it gets made at all.
It's complicated enough, it feels like at times, but yeah. And I think that the oils too, sorry to one more thing, we talk about hot stuffing all the time, and hot stuffing is another separate process. But really, if you think about it, it should be, or in my mind, it's considered part of retanning. It's just happening without water instead of in the place of fat liquoring. So instead of the waxes and oils being emulsified and done during the retanning process, all contained in one vessel, it happens separately because we do use like tallow and beeswax and paraffin and things that you can't emulsify and carry with water. So you need to do it separately, but you're getting a lot of the same benefits by doing that. It's just not as easy to control and it's not as efficient, but there's some, like with anything else, there's trade-offs.
That's going to be the title of the episode. It's like, oh, everything's a trade-off.
Yeah. Do what you want. What do you want to make?
Yeah.
Well, like a perfect example, I know Phil was saying about you put the oils to smell good and stuff like that. But again, it's like, it's a subjective question, right? It's like, what are we trying to make? If you're trying to make something that's a boot, you want it to have that pull up, you're going to want to use natural oils. But if, let's say you want to make, like how Nick was saying, upholstery, it's a different beast. You're not going to put natural oils. You have to put synthetic oils because they will react differently. They won't smell. It's not going to have any fogging effect. So all of that.
Color fastness.
Yeah, all that changes and through the retan. And again, that's why Chrome Excel, I love Chrome Excel because like he was saying about hot stuffing, where you're essentially separating this fat liquoring stage away from phase 2 and you're making it your own, because like you said, you have full control of what oils and waxes you're putting in, and you're introducing that at a massive level, and it's creating something really lubricated. So it's like it's one of our articles that is really unique, because a lot of them now moving forward, a lot of leathers are always using this standard method, which is the fat liquoring. You want something that works with water, but you want to lubricate. But what if we use pure waxes? You're gonna have massive amount of lubrication throughout the whole side. But then the consequences, the trade-offs is the cementability, right? Are you going to try to cement with the Chrome Excel? Well, no, it's not designed for that. It's designed for other purposes, right?
I love that Esteban's first time on the show, he's figured out how nuanced all the past episodes have been. Because a lot of the times, Nick already quoted it. It's like, yeah, do whatever you want. It's like, it all depends. There's no answer, right? It's like, what's the best leather? There's nothing Like,
Well,
I think
why
people
there's a
come to
million options. Yeah.
people come to the podcast and they just want to be told like, get this thing right. And for us, it's like, well, what do you like? And like you said with the smell, what's a good smell to you? You know, it depends.
Yeah, everything's arbitrary, right? It's like, yeah. Something else I forgot to touch up was another couple of, like I said, like with those synthetic oils, you could also use different, like there are also resins, the things to fill in that phase two. One of them is like, for example, like I was talking about buffing properties. One of them is called acrylate. So those acrylates are more they have more of a great time reacting with the top part where the grain is. So that's why with buffing, those work great for that nice buffing property. And then you have stuff like polymeric resins; those work more for filling. So if you're trying to mill something, the lubrication is those waxes are designed for that milling effect. So there's a lot of things you can do in phase two. It just depends. Like I said, I'm gonna keep saying this over and over again. What is it that you want?
Yeah.
What do you want to make?
We talked about how hot stuffing is part of phase two, part of the retanning section. And I noticed on your stationery, Nick, it says Horween leather tanners and couriers. I was thinking about it as you were speaking. It kind of feels like you could call hot stuffing currying, but maybe I don't understand what the definition of currying is.
Currying is a hand application. That's like
Specifically
brushes.
hand.
Yeah. I mean, you could consider, I mean, depending on how you want to define it, like you could consider currying as almost like an additional part of the retanning. So it's like another layer of hot stuffing, but you're doing it with an oil that you can spread by hand with the brush.
Why not take the blend that you use to hot stuff Chromexcel and curry that instead of run it through a steam drum?
Wait, say that again?
So the materials that you're retanning in hot stuffing for Chromexcel, that blend of natural waxes and waxes, I think, and grease, why not just melt that in a bucket and hand apply it instead of running it in a steam drum?
You could. I mean, you could if you could control the temperature and everything.
That was what I'm about to say.
It's just not efficient. It's not, and the currying, most of the currying that we do at this point is on cordovan, and that's because it's better to do it that way. But because the thickness is so different from one side to the other, that it really benefits from that hand application. So we dunk the brush in the oil, and we start on the thick side, and then we end on the thin side. So you're applying progressively less oil, like as you're currying, as you're brushing, and there's really no good way to do that on a machine, because the machine just wants to put an even coat on the whole thing, which is beneficial in some cases, but for something like this, like the hand application is better.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you could curry a stuffing blend by hand if you were mad at yourself and wanted to stand over hot, wet leather all day.
I'm kind of realizing there's an analogy here, or an analog that we talked about earlier with veg tanning, where you can use different tree barks. It's sort of analogous to waxes and oils. It's like, well, what color is the oil? You know, what kind of smell is that oil going to give you? Maybe the oils give different roundnesses, or waxes give different roundnesses. It's probably very similar to tree barks. It's almost like those are like playing the same roles, but just in different areas of the tannery.
Yeah. Do you want something that's pliable and easy and flexible, or do you want something that's going to be firmer and have higher water resistance? So you look at the difference between something like a hard wax, like a paraffin, versus, something like a fish oil. I mean, they're like those are two different things, and give you a very different characteristics, but they could be part of the same blend.
I was going to add on to that same question you were saying about can you just curry Chromexcel waxes on sides? I think you would have more of a difficulty. Well, I like how you just said about the waxes being high. They need high temperatures to get into a liquid state, but then you're fighting two things. You're keeping temperature with the oils and the waxes in there so they don't freeze, and you're also making sure that ideally this side stays hot all the time. Because the side has to be hot too. Because what's going to happen?
Put on a table, hot steam table.
Good luck trying to get that one going. But so essentially, that's why you have the hot stuffing, where you're increasing the temperature and you're milling at the same time, and you're introducing the oil. So you're doing the same action of phase two that you normally do, but just with waxes. So you're getting the maximum amount of heat and distribution happening at once. You can't do that with with currying because I feel like the grain, you're only going to get the grain on top. What about the flesh? So you could try, but you're going to have a nice little cake of wax on the surface. That's going to be.
Yeah, the thicker the piece, the harder it would be. And you'd for sure have to do both sides. Yeah. And if it was a thicker piece, you'd put more on. And then we probably would end up putting it in a pile and letting it sit for 2 weeks so that the whatever we put on could equalize throughout that. But during that 2 weeks, you'd want it to be warm enough to keep everything mobile and moving and also keep the moisture the same. It's like there's a reason it happens in a drum because we heat the drum, we heat the leather, we heat the waxes and the oils. They all go in, and then when everything is in the right spot, we combine it all, and then it comes out.
I just had a funny thought. I'm realizing like all these stupid questions are the questions that somebody had over the last hundreds and thousands of years, and they tried it, and they're like, "That was stupid."
Yeah. We live and we learn, right?
Well, I know the other thing is like with the oils is, I feel like there's a small subset or a small selection of oils that I see or waxes or greases being used, and they all tend to be pretty animal-y. If I think about it, maybe not.
That's us though. That's our place. Yeah.
Well, like, so why not use peanut oil? We talked about this in a past episode. Esteban, do you have any sense of choosing different lubricating oils or waxes? Why not use coconut oil or, we talked about motor oil.
The first thought that I would think about is just because you're fighting the smaller the chain that waxes in terms of the lipids, the easier something's going to eat it. And remember, we were talking about the same thing of avoiding bacteria eating any part of our leather. So you want things that are pretty dense and pretty big that can break it down, and stuff that's solid, right? At room temperature, unless you're heating this leather up into a liquid state, it's going to be really hard for any sort of biome, something small to try to eat it and putrefy it, right? Or that's why you see, like, if you leave coconut open, it's gonna go rancid and it's gonna start smelling, right? It's like, I don't want that on my. Let's start smelling.
I can't have literal butter leather.
You could put it there; it's just not gonna smell good in a couple of weeks, right? It'll ferment there, but ideally, it's more or less you choose. Again, I'm sound like a broken record. What is it that we want? Do we want something firm? Do you want something soft? So you're going to choose what types of waxes and grease you want for that leather.
I want my leather to be like my pizza crust from Lou Malnati's. I want just butter crust leather.
That's going to be a lot of butter.
That's a lot of butter, yeah. That's the other thing is the stuff gets expensive, right?
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to top up now as we're talking, and I'm kind of getting my thoughts together. The other one that happens in phase 2 is waterproofing. I know that's a pretty big one that everyone likes, right? Because if you're making shoes, you want it to be repelling water. But again, that system also takes a lot more of a control of your pH because you're using a lot of silicone based products. And so again, it's also pH dependent. All these things, kind of like how the waxes are with the temperatures, this is the same thing throughout the whole scope is pH dependencies and how you do. So you want stuff to go in, you want stuff to freeze, and essentially that helps repel anything. You're creating that repulsion happening in those leathers. But I wanted to add that one because I forgot. That's waterproofing also happens. You can do that post, but here is usually a big aspect in phase 2.
There's all silicone is how it's that's the main thing that makes a waterproof leather.
Silicone leather. Silicone and resins and acrylics, also a blend of all those can go into factors in the retan.
We used to be able to call Chrome XL waterproof. I mean, standards have changed, but like
that's the big thing, right?
So the
water resistant or waterproof.
Used to be able to say, Chrome XL is waterproof because it's got the oil content was high enough that it was repellent enough, and I think the people get fixated on the waterproof idea or the waterproof characteristics and testing methods. And how many flexes, how many times can the piece of leather flex before water starts to intrude, and how much moisture is it holding? And I think that I think that's important for a lot of or for some applications. But I think that I would caution people and say it's almost more important to have a leather that can get wet and then can dry and maintain integrity. That's more important overall, I think, than something that's going to repel water. And even maybe less interestingly is that so many constructions of, when speaking in footwear, aren't even waterproof anyway. Like if you are like, oh, I want to make some waterproof boat shoes. It's like, well, you've got a million holes, hand punched holes in the top of your shoe. Like, why do you need the leather to be waterproof? You want it to be able to get wet and then dry and look like it never got wet. I mean, that's much more important.
It's a lot easier to sell a boot with a waterproof sticker on it than.
Yeah, it's something that people have to worry about, I guess. But yeah, it's not. Again, it's like, well, what do you want, and like, what are you making? That
and like think about the one thing that people forget is the permeability, right? The breathability of your shoe, right? Because if the shoe is waterproof and it's fully sealed, guess what's going to stay there? It's going to be a lot of sweat in there, and you don't want any stinky shoes. So it's more of a balance between waterproof, but you still want breathability, right? So it is an interesting. It's chemistry. It's already it's a challenge as well to create that. You want something that can breathe.
Are you saying that's possible? Is it possible to make a porous waterproof leather that's breathable?
It starts by just retention. Yeah, you're essentially repelling. You're filling the voids of the leather that only when there's water it'll repel, and when there's no water it'll allow. So it kind of like a swelling, if you will, and shrinkage depending on what you're using. I mean, that happens in the retan, and you'll see that as well in phase 3, right? So.
Yeah, the swelling oils. That blew my mind when somebody explained to me how the waterproof works, that the water touches the swelling oil and it swells and it prevents the water from going in. It's awesome that somebody figured that out.
It's crazy how there's so many, and there's a million different combinations and things that work together, especially in the waterproof realm. Things that you can put with waterproofing oils, and things that you can't because they start to defeat them. And there's a lot to consider. I mean, even if you say, I want something that's I want a white waterproof leather that has pull up. It's like, well, it's like impossible. Like there's just like you have to pick what you want, and usually you can get like two of the 4 things that you want, and then you start to try to get. If you try to get everything exactly, like I want it to look totally natural, but also be consistent every time. It's like, well, that's not, you can't do that either.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And going back to the whole waterproof, where it's like you're making it waterproof, let's say in this retanning phase, and it's working. But if you you have to think in mind how the product's going to be in the final and work your way backwards, if you will, because you can have waterproof and you did all stuff in phase 2, but then if you don't know what you're doing in phase 3 and finishing it, you open up those fibers once more, like how Nick was saying, it interacts. There's opposing forces, and now you're back to no waterproof. So it's paramount that when you make this product, that has to be, everything is linked together, a big chain between the retan and your phase 3, which is, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about that one as we go, but the whole chain of line has to be all thought out together so that everything works synergistically.
All right, so before we move on to phase 3, we're just talking on the side here. I think we should do a whole additional episode on phase 3, and we'll give people a chance to ping some questions here to Esteban about any of phase 1 and phase 2, and maybe even phase 3. If you want to ask the questions, we can bring those up at the start of or the end of next episode. We'll start talking about some of the drying and finishing that the tanneries do. So please, leave a comment in the video here, and we'll get to those comments for sure. And let's just put a bow on this one today, because I have to tell you guys, it's really late and I'm super tired and I'm very hungry too. So I'll take the bullet here for ending this one abruptly. But I wanted to end it on some favorites. So young Steve, favorites are sometimes how we end the episode, to talk about things that we like to do that are favorite of the week. Something that I've been rephrasing it recently as things that you like to do that are not work related, that are relaxing. So what have you been into?
I've been brewing recently, so I'm kind of happy that I just finished a couple of beers. Right now I'm doing a lager, so I'm excited for that Vienna lager to be done, but it takes longer, so it's like 3 weeks. So I finished it, but I still have to let it in the fridge for another 3 weeks. So yeah, home brewing is what I've been doing. And I just
more chemistry, great.
Yeah.
I'm just telling them.
I was going to say everyone, not work related.
It's definitely not work related. So I'll tell everyone, you want beer, just bring bottles, and I'll give you bottles.
Oh, all right. I'm in.
Yeah,
Nick, you got one?
Sure. I've been watching. I think I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. The show The Boys. Have you watched that, Phil?
I seen like the first 2 episodes, and it wasn't for me.
The
I should give it another shot.
I like it. I mean, it's like a crazy show, but it's there aren't that many shows where I'm like I watch it and I'm caught up to it all the time, and that's like one of the shows. I just think it's entertaining and definitely not for kids, but if you guys haven't seen it, I would check it out.
I saw the trailer. It looks pretty good. I'm definitely gonna check that.
It's pretty intense.
Yeah. People blowing up.
There's a lot of that.
I was saving this favorite for our episode here with Esteban. I've been really into, this sounds strange to say out loud, but I've been really into Chernobyl. So there's an HBO miniseries called Chernobyl, which I love.
Really good.
But there's also a book called Midnight in Chernobyl, which the show is based upon.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is even
Crazy.
better. There's so much in there, but the big takeaway for me is like chemistry is crazy. It's like unbelievable. And then the other thing that like I've done the book a few times now, and I've watched the series a few times because I'm a weirdo. I've also noticed that the Soviet Union was like so bureaucratic, and I didn't realize that was a part of the message of the book until like the second read through here. It's just like, if you pay attention to the first scene where it's like, all right, wake up the bosses, and then the bosses have to wake up their bosses, and then like their bosses have another thing, and like the guy at the beginning like didn't want to get in trouble, so like all that chain of events went backwards from like everybody deflecting blame. It's just like so crazy how that system worked. But I also noticed like the TMI thing here is like I'm really weird about disasters. I don't know. I like fascinates me. Just like this is so crazy, and I get fixated and want to watch all the shows and books multiple times.
That show got criticized a little bit because they like one of the most important characters was like a composite of like 50 people. But I watched that series probably 3 times, and I've read that book too. It's good. It's awesome. Super intense, but it's worth. They're both worth the watch and the read.
Yeah, man. All right, well, bring another favorite for the next episode, guys.
Cool.
And everybody else, thanks for joining the episode today. Thank you, young Steve, who used to call you
Tanner. Me, guys.
That was amazing, man. I'm really, really excited to see what people think, and excited to get all the questions, and we can get some more out of you for the next episode. So thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you again next time.